My name is Ghoshal. I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Goucher College, and I'm here to talk about the impact of race on finding a roommate on Craigslist. So a great deal of prior research by sociologists and other social scientists has looked at the impact of race and racial discrimination in formal or economic realms, things like trying to buy a house or apply for jobs. One of the clearest findings of this line of research is that African Americans face substantial discrimination and other non-white groups face some level of discrimination as well. This slide here is from a now classic study that showed that identical resumes were treated very differently, simply depending on whether the name on them was white or black. Something not studied as much, though, is discrimination or bias in social relationships, something that's not that is understudied. And so social relationships matter in lots of ways. First, they're just an important part of our lives. Second, they connect us to social networks, information opportunities, all sorts of things. And roommate relationships are one particularly important type of relationship like this. Especially if you're young, you're moving to a new city, you're probably not going to buy a house right away, and you're probably going to live with roommates, which can impact your life in all kinds of ways, what neighborhood you live in, what opportunities you have, and so on. So to look at the impact of race on roommate opportunities, my colleague Michael Gaddis and I designed an experiment in which we applied to 1,500 roommate wanted ads on Craigslist in 3 metropolitan areas. That's a lot, yep. We wanted to know whether race impacts the chance of receiving responses, and we also wanted to know how cues about foreignness or supposed Americanness play into this, sort of separately or additionally than race. We created a large number of fake identities, email addresses associated with them. They all fell into these categories, white, black, and then variants of traditional or Americanized other groups like Latinas, Arabs, Indian, Chinese names, etc. We chose names to reflect racial or ethnic backgrounds. We used census data to make sure that we were choosing pretty common names. And we were also able to control for class background of every name thanks to some data we had about mother's average education. We then generated some email texts. All the emails we sent with using different names or different email addresses conveyed the information that I'm a mid-20s female, which is not true actually, but I'm interested in your room, I have a job, I have a college degree, etc. We then chose and replied to roommate wanted ads, making sure that we only replied to ads where it looked like an actual roommate had posted the ad, because remember, we're not so interested in formal or economic discrimination. That's been studied more. We're more interested in social discrimination, things that are a little bit more informal. So just think for a second about what you might expect. And the first big set of findings are that, sort of similar to some other studies, there's a substantial impact of race when whites are compared to Latinas and black names. This slide is just showing that for every 100 replies a white name got, a Latina name got 74, a black name got 67 replies. So pretty big impact, pretty consistent with some prior work. Perhaps a little bit more surprising, there's also a substantial impact to white versus Asian names. This is showing white, Indian, Chinese, and Arab names. Not quite as big an impact as the Latina black versus white difference, but still definitely there. The last thing we looked at was Americanized names, and this is something like taking a name like Jimena Garcia, for example, and changing it maybe to Jennifer Garcia, perhaps just to make it easier to pronounce, perhaps to suggest acculturation or something like that. Here the results were a bit different. There's actually no statistically detectable discrimination against Americanized Indian or Chinese names. So Jennifer Patel and Jennifer Huang would be treated the same as Jennifer Smith. And there's some, but not as large, bias against Americanized Latina names. What we draw from this, so there's still unequal opportunity, even in a supposedly post-racial generation. It is at least partly about race. It's not just reducible to class because we controlled for class in various ways. For Asian Americans, there's selective incorporation, where Asian Americans who signal Americanness through their names seem to be pretty highly incorporated, others maybe not so much. And ultimately, names still do matter, at least a great deal in this context. Now, we've all probably had horrible roommate experiences at some point in our lives. Hopefully, they're more like that and less like this, where somebody tries to murder us in the middle of the night. What I want to suggest, though, is that to some degree, perhaps we're all responsible for these experiences, right? If we're relying on superficial cues like names and race too much, rather than what a person is actually like, then it's kind of our own fault if we have bad relations or bad social relationships with people, right? So we can actually do something about this problem. One other set of actors that could do something about this would be sites like Craigslist or roommates.com, which could do more to front-load information about people's personalities through questionnaires or measures like that, so that people have more to rely on rather than superficial cues like names or race. Thank you.